The farm is mine now." Those 5 words came out of my brother's mouth like poison. He said them so casually, as if he were commenting on the weather. But to me, they carried the weight of a lifetime, of every sunrise I had worked, every storm I had endured, every aching bone in my body earned by this land. And then, as if the insult wasn't enough, the clerk sitting across from us glanced down at the papers and turned to my brother with words I'll never forget. "Ready to sign it back to your brother?" That was the moment the entire room froze. My brother's smirk faltered for the first time, and I felt something in me stir, something that had been buried under decades of sacrifice and silence. But before I tell you how we reached that moment, you need to know the story of how betrayal crept into my life, disguised as family loyalty. And before I begin, let me just say this. If you're listening right now, take a second to subscribe to the channel and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. These stories aren't just about me. They're about every one of us who's been betrayed by someone we trusted most. My name is Edward Whitmore. I'm 72 years old, and I've spent nearly every day of my life on the same piece of land, our family farm. To me, it was never just soil and fences, never just barns and tractors. It was memory, legacy, and the marrow of who we were as a family. My father used to say, "Land doesn't just belong to you, you belong to it. Every step you take here is borrowed, and you pay it back with sweat." I believed him. I lived by those words. Through blistering summers and punishing winters, I gave everything to this land. When other kids in town went on vacations, we stayed home to tend crops. When I married my late wife, Mary, I promised her stability, even if it meant I was late for dinners or missed birthdays, because the harvest came first. My brother, Richard, was different. He liked the taste of comfort without the bitterness of labor. He was younger by 6 years, and our parents had softened by the time he came along. Where I was handed calluses, he was handed leniency. Where I was told to endure, he was told, "Don't worry, Edward will handle it." And handle it I did. Every broken fence, every sick cow, every late bill that threatened the farm. I carried it all, while Richard chased easy pleasures in town. For decades, I never held it against him. He was my brother, blood, family. I thought that bond was enough, that one day he'd realize this farm wasn't mine or his, but ours. But I was wrong. I still remember the last peaceful morning before it all began. The rooster had crowed just before dawn, same as always. I stepped onto the porch with my coffee, breathing in the scent of dew on the alfalfa fields. The sun stretched across acres of green, the same fields my father once plowed with horses before tractors came along. I stood there and thought, this is home. This will always be home. And yet, somewhere in town, Richard was sharpening his knife, not the kind you hold in your hand, but the kind made of entitlement, greed, and betrayal. He started small. Over Sunday dinners, he'd toss remarks that seemed harmless at first. "Eddie, you've had a good run, but maybe it's time to let someone younger handle the farm." Or, "What do you need all this land for anyway? You don't even have children living here." I'd laugh it off, hiding the sting. I thought he was joking. I thought he was just restless. Mary used to squeeze my hand under the table, silently warning me not to rise to his bait. But a seed of unease planted itself that night. One I didn't water, but somehow grew anyway. You see, Richard always liked to remind people that he helped out on the farm when we were younger. Helped out, those words were bitter in my mouth. Yes, he'd carried hay bales once or twice. Yes, he'd driven the tractor when I was too sick to. But the truth, he never stayed long enough to know what sacrifice truly tasted like. When the storms of '74 nearly wiped us out, he wasn't the one bailing water from the barn roof. When drought cracked our fields in '86, he wasn't the one rationing feed and praying cattle would last the season. When our father passed, leaving us with debts that could have swallowed the land whole, it was me. Me who worked double shifts, me who pawned possessions, me who buried my pride and begged the bank for time. Richard? He was off in town, smiling over whiskey glasses, boasting about our farm to people who didn't know the truth. And yet, when he finally showed up years later, standing tall in the clerk's office, he had the gall to look me in the eye and claim, "The farm is mine now." Those words cracked something in me, not just anger, but grief, because I realized in that moment my brother hadn't simply betrayed me. He had betrayed our father, our mother, Mary, and every ancestor who had touched this soil before us. He had turned legacy into leverage, family into conquest. The clerk's eyes had flicked between us, sensing tension he probably saw too often in families like ours. He tapped the papers on his desk and asked the question that turned the air to stone. "So, are you ready to sign it back to your brother?" Richard leaned forward, already reaching for the pen. But me? I stood still, staring at that deed, feeling every wrinkle on my hands, every scar on my back, every ghost of sacrifice whispering in my ear. My brother thought he'd already won, but he didn't know that I wasn't about to hand over the one thing that had defined my entire life. This was just the beginning. When I introduce myself, I don't usually start with my name. Out here, in small towns and county fairs, people don't ask, "Who are you?" They ask, "Whose land do you work?" And for 72 years, my answer has been the same. The Whitmore Farm, out on County Road 16. My name is Edward Whitmore, but around here, my name doesn't mean half as much as the soil under my boots. People nod when I say it because they know this land. They know the fields I've plowed, the cattle I've raised, the barns I've rebuilt after storms tore them down. They know the sweat in my shirt and the dirt under my nails. That's who I am. Not Edward the man, but Edward of the farm. And if you think I say that with pride, you're right. But it's not an empty pride. It's the kind that comes from back-breaking labor, from debts barely escaped, from 100 nights falling asleep in a tractor cab while the harvest moon kept watch over me. This farm wasn't given to me in a neat package. It was earned the hard way, inch by inch, season after season. My father, Henry Whitmore, laid the foundation, and my mother kept the household stitched together when money ran thin. When he passed, it was me who stood between the bank and the soil he bled for. It was me who said, "I'll keep it going." And I did, for decades. But here's the thing about family land. It doesn't just carry crops, it carries ghosts. When I walk the fields in spring, I still see my father's bent back in the furrows. When I stand by the old oak tree, I hear my mother's voice calling us for supper. In the barn rafters, I see shadows of calves born in the dead of winter, and in the kitchen, I feel the warmth of Mary's hand brushing against mine after long days. Every corner of this place holds memory, and memory to me is sacred. So when Richard, my younger brother, came sniffing around with his talk of ownership, it wasn't just land he was after. He was trying to steal my memories, my sacrifices, my identity. Richard was born 6 years after me, and I swear those 6 years might as well have been 6 generations. By the time he came along, our parents were softer, older, tired of discipline. Where I was woken before dawn to milk cows, Richard slept in. Where I was told, "Edward, you carry the weight for the family," Richard was told. "Don't worry, Eddie will help you." And help him I did. Through school fights, through his reckless spending in his 20s, through a divorce that left him with nothing but bitterness. I carried him more times than I can count, and I never kept score. He was my brother. You don't keep score with blood. Or at least, I thought you didn't. While I was sweating over ledgers and mending fences, Richard was in town flashing smiles. He always had a way with people, slick, charming, making promises he never intended to keep. Folks liked him, at least on the surface. But when things went south, when debts came due or his name turned sour, guess who they came looking for? Me, the brother with the farm, the brother with the steady reputation, the brother who owed him. I told myself it was temporary, that one day he'd settle down, find honest work, maybe even lend a hand on the land. But that day never came. Instead, he'd roll up the drive every few months with a smile too wide and a story too thin, asking for just a little help. And like a fool, I'd give it. Not because I was blind, but because deep down I believed in family above all else. I thought one day he'd look me in the eye and say, "Thank you. Let me carry the load for a while." But he never did. Instead, the older I got, the bolder he became. He stopped asking with humility and started talking like he had a right to it. "Eddie, you don't need all that land. You're not even farming it like you used to. Might as well hand some of it over. What's the point of you keeping it all? You can't take it with you." At first, I laughed, thinking it was just talk. Families tease each other, don't they? But under the laughter, I felt a stone forming in my stomach. Because in Richard's eyes, I didn't see brotherly teasing. I saw hunger, greed. And that's when I started to realize something. My brother didn't love this farm. He envied it. He envied me. I wish I could tell you that realization came early enough to stop what was coming. But betrayal doesn't walk through the front door and announce itself. It creeps in slowly, wrapped in smiles and familiar voices, until one day it's sitting across from you, holding papers that say everything you worked for now belongs to someone else. That day at the clerk's office wasn't the first betrayal. It was just the loudest. The truth is, it had been building for years. Richard had always been the golden-tongued wanderer. I had always been the anchor. And anchors hold fast, but even anchors rust when the tide keeps beating at them. For years his words wore me down. I started to wonder if maybe he was right. Maybe I was too old. Maybe I couldn't keep up. Maybe the farm deserved someone younger. But then I'd walk the fields at dawn, hear the cry of a hawk overhead, feel the soil crumble between my fingers, and I knew. This farm wasn't just mine to give away. It was mine to protect. So when Richard finally made his move, when he stood there, bold as brass, saying, "The farm is mine now," I didn't hear the voice of a brother. I heard the voice of every debt collector I'd fought off, every banker who wanted to carve the land into pieces, every stranger who thought legacy was just dirt with a price tag. The difference was, this stranger shared my blood, and that's the part that hurt the most. By the time we reached the clerk's office, he thought he had me cornered. He thought age had made me weak. The time had worn down my fight. He thought he could sign away my life's work with the stroke of a pen. But what Richard didn't know, what he never understood, was that every scar on my hands, every ache in my bones, every sleepless night on this land had prepared me for this fight. He was playing a game. I was defending a legacy. And there's a difference. There's something about early mornings on a farm that city folk will never understand. The air feels different, heavier, cleaner, full of life that hasn't yet been disturbed. I'd step out onto the porch at dawn, mug of coffee warming my hands, and watch as the mist clung to the fields like a blanket reluctant to leave. In those moments, everything was still. No arguments, no debts, no bitterness, just the land and me, keeping each other company. I used to tell Mary, back when she was alive, that these mornings were my church. I didn't need pews or stained glass when I had a horizon stretched wide open, painted in pinks and golds, reminding me that even after the darkest night, light always returns. She'd smile, kiss my cheek, and say, "Well then, don't forget to tithe. Go mend those fences." That was Mary, always practical, never letting me get too lost in poetry. But I think she understood. She knew the land wasn't just where we lived. It was who we were. If you had asked me back then what peace looked like, I would have pointed to those mornings. The dog curled at my feet, the sound of the rooster crowing, cattle lowing in the distance, and the steady rhythm of my boots hitting dirt as I walked the fence line. Each post I touched carried a story. This one was set by my father in '52, the summer we nearly lost half the herd to sickness. That one was replaced by me in '79, when a tornado tore through and left splinters where a barn used to stand. Every nail, every board, every scar in the soil had meaning. And though the work broke my body slowly, stooping, lifting, hauling, I didn't resent it. The aches in my knees, the calluses on my palms, the sunspots on my skin. They were proof that I'd honored the promise I made when my father died, to keep the farm alive, no matter the cost. Richard, of course, was never part of that picture. He hated mornings. Said they made him feel like death to be up before the sun. While I was out shoveling feet in the cold, he was still asleep in town, chasing dreams that never seemed to pay his bills. And when he did roll in, it wasn't to help. It was to lean on a fence post, sipping soda, making jokes about how I looked married to the dirt. But I never let myself get angry. I'd tell myself, he's younger. He'll come around. I convinced myself that one day he'd wake up and realize that this land wasn't just mine. It was ours. He'd finally see what I saw when the sun rose over the fields. But he never did. I remember one Sunday in particular. The church bell had just finished ringing, and I was sitting with Mary on the porch swing. We didn't talk much. After so many years together, silence between us wasn't empty. It was full. We watched the children from the neighboring farm race. Down the dirt road on their bicycles, their laughter echoing through the air. That was when Richard pulled up. He had a new car, well, new to him. The kind of shiny purchase that looked good until you realized it came with strings he couldn't afford. He leaned against the hood, sunglasses perched on his nose, and said, "You know, Eddie, when this place is mine, I'm tearing down that old barn. Put up something modern, sleek." Oh, I chuckled at the time, thinking it was just talk. But Mary's hand tightened around mine, and I saw her glance at him with that wary look she always had when Richard got too comfortable. It was a small moment, forgotten by most. But looking back now, it was one of the first cracks in the peace I thought would last forever. See, that's the cruel thing about nostalgia. When you're in it, it feels endless. But later, when you replay it in your mind, you start to notice the shadows creeping at the edges. For me, the shadows were always there in Richard's words. He'd say things like, "When you're done with the farm," or "You won't be able to run this place forever." At first, I brushed it off. Families joke, don't they? But the older I got, the less it sounded like a joke, and the more it sounded like a plan. Still, in those days, I clung to the good. I'd walk the rows of corn in the evening, the stalks tall and whispering in the breeze, and I'd think, this is what makes it worth it. I'd see the neighbor kids wave at me as they rode by, calling me Mr. Whitmore, and I'd think, this is legacy. I believe peace was permanent. I believe blood was enough to bind loyalty. But peace, I've learned, is fragile. And blood doesn't always mean family. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, I found myself standing at the edge of the property, looking out at the boundary line. Our father had planted a row of maples there when we were boys. Back then, he told us, "These trees will outlive me, maybe even outlive you. They'll stand guard over this farm long after we're gone." I used to run my hands along their bark, feeling the ridges, thinking of how deep their roots ran. Roots, to me, always meant security. But I didn't realize until much later that roots can also strangle if you're not careful. That night, as the fireflies rose from the grass and the frogs sang by the pond, I let myself believe that everything was safe, that the land, the memories, the legacy would hold. But peace is deceptive. Sometimes it's just the silence before the storm. And my storm, my brother, was already brewing on the horizon. I just didn't know it yet. It didn't happen all at once. Betrayal rarely does. It seeps in like water through a crack in the foundation. Slow, almost invisible, until one day the whole house is leaning, and you wonder how you didn't see it sooner. For years, Richard's comments rolled off me like dust in the wind. I'd hear him say things like, "One day this'll all be mine anyway." And I'd chuckle, telling myself it was harmless talk. But little by little, those words started carrying a different weight. Less like a joke, more like a declaration. I remember one evening, Mary and I had invited him for supper. She made pot roast, his favorite, because no matter what, she always tried to keep the peace. We set the table, the smell of rosemary and garlic filling the kitchen, and for a brief moment, I thought maybe it would be one of those nights where we could just be family. But halfway through the meal, as the gravy boat made its way around, Richard leaned back in his chair and said, "You know, Eddie, you ought to start thinking about what happens when you can't run this place anymore. It's a lot of land for one old man." The fork paused halfway to my mouth. Mary's eyes flicked to mine, warning me not to rise to it, but my hand trembled anyway. Old man. That's what he called me, not brother, not partner. Old man. I swallowed hard, forced a smile, and said, "This land's in good hands, Richard. Don't you worry about that." But inside, I was worrying plenty. A week later, he showed up unannounced. His truck rattled up the driveway, dust kicking high behind him. He stepped out with that grin of his, the one that always looked like it belonged to a man who had just won a bet. "Thought I'd check on the farm," he said, stretching his arms like he owned the place. I raised an eyebrow. "Farm's doing just fine. Same as yesterday, same as last year." He walked with me down the path toward the barn, his boots barely touching the ground, while mine sank deep into the dirt I'd tilled. He gestured toward the fields and said, "Lot of work for someone your age. You ever think about letting me take over before you drop dead out here?" It was half a laugh, half a jab, but all of it stung. I stopped in my tracks. "Richard, this farm isn't some toy you pick up when you feel like it. It's not a bar tab I can hand you." He shrugged. "Just saying, Eddie. Everyone knows it'll be mine someday. Why drag it out?" And just like that, he turned and walked off toward the house, as if the conversation meant nothing. But to me, it meant everything. For the first time, I saw his words not as thoughtless teasing, but as intent. That night after he left, I found myself standing in the living room, staring at the family photo on the mantel. It was from decades earlier, me and Richard as boys, sitting on our father's lap, dirt smeared on our cheeks after a long day in the fields. My father had one hand on each of our shoulders, his face proud, his eyes full of the kind of hope only a parent carries. I picked up the photo, studied it under the lamplight, and felt a chill run through me. That boy in the picture, grinning with missing teeth, was my brother. But the man who'd stood in my kitchen, tonight, talking about me dropping dead, he wasn't the same person. Somewhere along the way, something had twisted in him. I set the photo back down carefully, but not before noticing it had been tilted slightly forward, as if it was bowing under the weight of time, or maybe under the weight of truth. The cracks kept widening. At a neighbor's gathering, Richard laughed too loud and said, "Eddie's just keeping the farm warm for me. Won't be long now." People chuckled awkwardly, not sure if he was joking. But I saw the way he looked at me when he said it, eyes sharp, measuring. It wasn't a joke to him. It was a warning. Even Mary, who always tried to see the good in him, started frowning when his truck rolled up the drive. "He's not just teasing anymore," she said one night as we washed dishes. "He's circling." "Circling?" I asked. She nodded, drying a plate slowly. "Like a hawk over a field mouse, waiting for the right moment to swoop." Her words sat heavy in my chest. One afternoon I caught him in the barn. He hadn't told me he was coming, but there he was, rummaging through old boxes of paperwork. Deeds, receipts, tax records, the kind of things most folks wouldn't find interesting. But I knew better. "What are you doing in here?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. He didn't even flinch. "Just curious. Trying to understand the business side of things, in case I need to take over." The audacity of it nearly knocked me back. "You don't just take over a farm, Richard. You earn it." He smirked, closing the box. "We'll see." That was when I knew the storm wasn't far off. It's strange, looking back. Those early comments, those little smirks, the tilted photo on the mantel, they were all warnings, signs of a betrayal sharpening its claws. But I wanted so badly to keep the peace, to believe family would never cross that line, that I ignored them. I told myself, he's just restless. He's just jealous. He'll grow out of it. But the truth is, greed doesn't shrink with time. It grows. And my brother's greed was about to grow into something I couldn't ignore. The first time I realized my brother wasn't just circling, but actually swooping, came on a Tuesday morning. The kind of day that starts ordinary, the sun peeking through clouds, the smell of hay in the barn, but ends with a weight that changes everything. I was in town running errands, paying for supplies at the hardware store, when old Mr. Grady, the clerk, leaned over the counter and said, "Eddie, didn't know you were handing things over." I frowned. "Handing what over?" "The farm," he said, casual as anything, sliding me the receipt. "Your brother was in the courthouse yesterday, asking about title transfers. Said you were too old to handle it anymore." The pen slipped from my hand. For a moment, I thought I'd misheard. Title transfers? Too old? I muttered something polite, shoved the receipt in my pocket, and left. But my legs carried me straight to the courthouse. The clerk's office was quiet, papers stacked high, the smell of ink and dust heavy in the air. Behind the counter sat a young man named Harris, who had been working there a few years. He knew me. He knew the farm. When he saw me, he shifted uncomfortably, as though he'd been expecting this. "Mr. Whitmore," he said, "I was just about to call you." "Why?" I asked, though my voice already trembled with the answer. He hesitated. "Your brother came by. He brought paperwork claiming partial ownership of the farm. Said you'd discussed transferring rights." My chest tightened. "That's a lie." Harris nodded. "I thought so. But he had documents, copies of tax receipts, some old bills with his name on them. He tried to spin it like he'd been co-owner all along." I felt my face burn hot, then cold. Old bills, receipts, things I'd let him sign over the years when he borrowed equipment or when I covered his debts. He was using my own mercy as ammunition against me. I asked to see the file. Harris slid it across the counter, his hand lingering as if to say, "I'm on your side, but I have to follow procedure." Inside the folder were papers with Richard's name scrawled across them, stapled to old invoices, faded contracts, even copies of checks I'd written to bail him out years ago. It was like watching my kindness turned into a noose. And then I saw it, the signature. My father's name, Henry Whitmore, signed at the bottom of a deed copy. Only it wasn't his handwriting. I knew my father's signature like I knew the back of my hand. I'd seen him write it 1,000 times, steady and firm. This one was shaky, uneven, rushed. A Hamaseed Vanny. My stomach churned. Richard hadn't just twisted the truth. He dragged our father's grave into it. He was willing to forge the hand of the man who raised us just to get his way. I closed the folder slowly, my fingers trembling. This is fraud. Harris lowered his voice. I can't say that officially. But between us? Yes. He's trying to build a case. He thinks if he pressures you, you'll cave. Or worse, if you pass before it's settled, the courts will lean in his favor. I walked out of that office in a haze, the weight of betrayal pressing so hard I could barely breathe. The courthouse steps felt steeper than any hill I'd climbed on the farm. When I got home, I sat in the living room, the folder still in my hands, and stared at the mantel. That family photo, the one of us as boys with our father, mocked me again. His steady hand on our shoulders, his eyes proud. What would he think now, seeing one son forging his name to rob the other? Mary's voice echoed in my memory. He's circling. She had been right. Only now, the hawk wasn't circling. It had sunk its talons in. Later that evening, Richard showed up at my door as if nothing had happened. His truck headlights cut through the dusk, and soon he was standing on my porch with that grin I'd come to hate. You hear from the clerk yet? He asked, leaning on the railing like he owned the place. I didn't answer right away. I just stared at him, searching his face for the boy I grew up with, the brother who once shared chores with me, who laughed with me under this very roof. But all I saw was greed. Richard, I said finally, my voice low, you forged Dad's name. His smile faltered, just for a second. But then he chuckled, brushing it off. Don't be so dramatic. I just helped the process along. You know how slow the county can be. Helped? My voice cracked. You dragged our father's grave into your scheme. He stepped closer, eyes narrowing. Don't talk to me like I'm the villain. You've been hogging this land for decades. You think you're the only Whitmore entitled to it? You think Dad meant for you to keep it all? He meant for us to honor it, I snapped, not tear each other apart over it. He smirked again, that cold twist of lips that made my blood run cold. Honor doesn't pay bills, Eddie. Land does. And whether you like it or not, the farm's slipping through your fingers. You're too old to hold it. That night after he left, I couldn't sleep. I walked the halls, the papers from the clerk's office spread across the table like scars I couldn't erase. Every signature, every invoice, every faded receipt told me the same thing. Richard wasn't planning to wait for me to die. He was planning to take it while I was still breathing. I stood by the window, looking out at the moonlit fields, and felt something inside me shift. This wasn't just about land anymore. It was about erasure. He didn't want to share. He wanted me gone. And for the first time in my life, I realized I couldn't rely on brotherhood to protect me. I would have to rely on the law. But even then, I didn't know just how far he was willing to go. I sat at the kitchen table long after Richard's truck rattled away into the night, the sound of his tires crunching down the gravel drive fading into the distance. The house was quiet, but not peaceful. Quiet in the way a battlefield is quiet after the fighting has stopped. Smoke still rising, scars still fresh. The folder from the courthouse lay open in front of me, papers spread like a trail of evidence, every page stained with betrayal. My father's forged signature, my own old check stapled to Richard's lies. Documents that once meant survival, now twisted into weapons aimed at my back. My hands trembled as I picked one up. A receipt from 1983. Feed store bill I'd paid on Richard's behalf when he was broke. I remembered that day. He'd come to me red-faced, ashamed, saying he just needed a little help. I gave it gladly. I told him, that's what brothers are for. Now here it was, repurposed into proof of his so-called investment. My generosity had become his claim. Mary came into the kitchen, her nightgown brushing the floor, her face lined with worry. She saw the papers, saw the look on my face, and said softly, "He's done it, hasn't he?" I nodded. "He's trying to take it, Mary. The farm. Our whole life." She sat down across from me, her hands folding neatly, though I could see the tension in her knuckles. "I told you he was circling." "I didn't want to believe it," I whispered. "He's my brother." Her eyes filled, but not with surprise, with sorrow. "Blood doesn't mean loyalty, Edward." "You've always known that, deep down." I rubbed my face, the stubble scratching my palms. "Do you know how many nights I stayed awake, figuring how to keep this place afloat? How many vacations we never took? How many Christmases I worked straight through? How many birthdays I missed? All so this farm would survive." She reached for my hand, squeezed it. "I know. I was there. I saw it all." I swallowed hard. "And Richard, he benefited from it all. The farm put food on his plate, paid debts he never repaid, gave him shelter when he burned through everything else. And this is how he thanks us." Mary's grip tightened. "Edward, listen to me. You've spent your whole life sacrificing for this land, for family, for him. But sacrifice without respect isn't love. It's exploitation." Her words cut deeper than Richard's ever could, because I knew she was right. That night, I couldn't close my eyes. Instead, I walked the halls of the farmhouse, each creak of the floorboards a reminder of history. I stopped in the living room, staring again at that family photo on the mantel. Me, Richard, and our father. I picked it up, studied the faces. My father's hand rested on both our shoulders, his expression one of quiet pride. In that frozen moment, we were a family bound by love and soil. But now, holding it in the lamplight, all I could see was the gap that had widened between us. I set the photo back down, but something in me refused to let it go. I walked to the barn, the moon guiding me. Inside, the smell of hay and oil wrapped around me like a blanket of memory. My father's tools still hung on the wall, rusted, worn, but solid. I ran my hand over the handle of his old hammer, the one he used to fix fences in the dead of winter, and whispered into the emptiness. "I kept my promise, Dad. I kept it alive. But your other son, he's trying to destroy it." My words echoed against the rafters, the silence answering back. The next morning, my daughter Claire came by with her 2 kids. She found me on the porch, papers still in my lap, eyes hollow. "Dad," she asked carefully, "what's wrong?" I hesitated, but she deserved the truth. I handed her the folder. She flipped through it, her brows furrowing, her lips pressing tight. When she looked up, her eyes were blazing. "He forged Grandpa's signature," she said flatly. I nodded. "Your uncle wants the farm." Her jaw clenched. "Over my dead body." The kids ran off to chase the chickens, unaware of the storm swirling in the adults. Claire sat beside me, her voice low but fierce. "You gave him everything, and now he wants to take the one thing that defines you. Dad, you can't let him." "I don't know if I have the fight left in me," I admitted. "I'm tired, Claire. Tired of working, tired of conflict." She put a hand on my shoulder, her eyes steady. "Then let us fight with you. You don't have to carry this alone anymore." Her words lit a small fire in me, a reminder that not all family was poisoned. Some bonds held strong. Still, the grief lingered. Every step I took across the farm felt heavier. When I fed the cattle, I remembered the nights I'd slept in the barn to keep them warm during blizzards. When I walked the fields, I saw decades of toil etched into the soil. Soil Richard wanted to claim without shedding a single drop of sweat. It hit me hardest by the oak tree, the one my father planted when I was a boy. Its roots ran deep, holding the earth firm. I pressed my palm against its bark and thought, this is what family is supposed to be, strong, steady, unshakable. But Richard, he was no oak. He was ivy, creeping, choking, feeding off what others had built until nothing remained. That evening Mary found me standing at the window, watching the sun bleed over the horizon. She slipped her arm around my waist, leaned her head against my shoulder, and said softly, "You can't carry this betrayal like a stone in your chest. You have to turn it into something." I looked down at her, weary. Into what? Her eyes, still sharp even after all these years, held mine. Into a boundary, into strength, into justice. And though grief weighed me down, something inside me stirred. A resolve I hadn't felt in years. Because Mary was right. Betrayal was heavy, but it could also be fuel. My brother thought he could use my kindness as weakness. He thought he could twist my sacrifices into proof of his entitlement. But he had forgotten one thing. I wasn't just a tired old man. I was the keeper of this land. And I had fought off storms far greater than him. The storm was coming again. But this time, I would not face it bending. I would face it standing tall. Betrayal has a way of feeding on itself. Once Richard realized I hadn't caved at his first attempt, he doubled down. He stopped hiding behind charm and started showing his teeth. It began with words, as always. Snide remarks over coffee at the diner. "Eddie, you'll break your back out there before long. Might as well let me take it off your hands before you keel over." He'd say it loud enough for others to hear, planting seeds of doubt in the ears of townsfolk who had known us both since childhood. I kept my composure, but inside, something twisted. He wasn't just circling me in private anymore. He was circling in public, staking his claim before the community as if the farm were already his. Then came the threats. One afternoon, I was fixing the south fence when his truck pulled up, dust swirling behind it. He leaned out the window, sunglasses flashing in the sun, and shouted, "You keep this up, Eddie, and you'll find yourself in court. And trust me, you won't like what happens when lawyers get involved." I set my hammer down, my hands shaking with both rage and weariness. "This isn't a game, Richard. This is our father's legacy." He smirked. "Legacy doesn't put money in pockets. Land does. And you're too old to use it. Sooner or later it'll be mine. You can hand it over easy, or I'll make it hard." His words hung in the hot summer air, thick as the sweat dripping down my back. That night, Mary caught me pacing the kitchen. "He's escalating," I told her, voice low. "He doesn't just want the farm. He wants to destroy me in the process." She laid a hand on my arm. "So what are you going to do?" I didn't answer, because truth was, I didn't know. A few days later, at a neighbor's barbecue, Richard's threats grew bolder. He laughed with his glass of whiskey in hand and announced, "Won't be long before I'm the one hosting you all at the Whitmore place. Eddie's just a placeholder now." The laughter that followed wasn't genuine. It was uneasy. People shifted in their seats, glancing at me, not knowing whether to believe him. I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to stay silent. But inside, I was burning, not just with anger, but with humiliation. When we got home that night, Claire called me aside. "Dad, you can't let him keep doing this. He's poisoning the community against you." I rubbed my temples, the weight of years pressing down. "I've fought storms, droughts, banks. I never thought I'd have to fight my own brother." Her eyes hardened. Then fight him harder. He's counting on you being tired. Don't give him that satisfaction." Her words cut through my hesitation like a plow through soil. For the first time, I realized this wasn't just about family squabbles anymore. This was war. The final straw came one evening when I found him standing at the edge of the north field, hands on his hips, surveying the land like a conqueror. "What are you doing here?" I asked, trying to keep my voice even. He turned slowly, his smile thin and sharp. "Just admiring what'll be mine. You can feel it, can't you, Eddie? The farm slipping away from you. You can fight me all you want, but time's on my side. And when you're gone, nobody's going to remember your sacrifices. They'll only remember who signed the papers." I stepped closer, my fists clenched. "You think a signature makes you a farmer? You think ink on paper means you understand this land?" He chuckled. "I don't need to understand it. I just need to own it." And with that, he turned, got into his truck, and drove off, leaving dust and dread in his wake. I stood there, staring at the horizon, and made a decision. I wasn't going to let Richard circle any longer. It was time to ground the hawk. The next morning I rose before the sun, the way I always had. But instead of walking the fields, I put on my cleanest shirt, grabbed the old deed from the lockbox under my bed, and drove to town. The county clerk's office wasn't a place I liked visiting. It smelled of dust and bureaucracy, a far cry from the honest scent of soil and livestock. But that day, it felt like a battlefield, and I had come armed with truth. Behind the counter, Harris looked up, surprise flickering across his face. "Mr. Whitmore, back again?" "Yes," I said firmly, setting the deed on the desk. "And this time, I'm not here to be blindsided. I want you to see this." He took the document carefully, unfolding the crisp paper. The handwriting was unmistakable, my father's steady, strong penmanship, ink faded but still proud. His signature, bold and true, declared the farm mine in full. No co-owner, no partnership, just me. Harris compared it to the forged one Richard had submitted. He didn't have to say anything. The difference was clear as day. "This," he whispered, pointing at Richard's shaky forgery, "this wouldn't hold up in court. Not for a second." Relief washed through me, heavy and bittersweet. "So what now?" Harris leaned closer. "Now you protect yourself. File to reaffirm your ownership. Tighten every loose end. Don't give him any room to twist your kindness again." From there, I went straight to see Mr. Caldwell, the lawyer who had helped my father back in the 70s. He was older now, hair white as snow, but his mind was sharp as a tack. After I explained everything, he sat back, steepling his fingers. "Edward, I'm sorry your brother's taken this road, but you're not powerless. In fact, you hold all the cards." He spread the documents across his desk. The original deed, the tax records in my name, decades of proof that I was the sole owner. "Your brother's case is built on sand," Caldwell said. "All he has is your goodwill from years past, receipts you covered, debts you forgave. That doesn't translate to ownership. And forging your father's name, that alone could land him in jail." I sat there, stunned. "Jail?" He nodded gravely. "If you choose to pursue it, but at the very least we'll shut down his claims permanently. I'll make sure he can never touch this farm again." Walking out of that office, clutching the papers that proved the truth, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Power. Not the kind that comes from control or money, but the power of justice. I looked up at the sky, saw a hawk circling high above, and thought of Mary's words. He's circling. Not anymore. This time I had the law on my side, and with it I was ready to clip his wings for good. The day of the showdown felt like a storm before it breaks. The sky was heavy with clouds, the air thick, and even the birds seemed quieter. I drove into town, with the deed resting on the passenger seat beside me, my father's handwriting staring up like a shield from the grave. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than usual, knuckles pale, heart steady but heavy. At the courthouse, Richard was already there. He stood on the steps in his best shirt, pressed, collar stiff, as if he were about to give a speech at some banquet. When he saw me, he grinned, teeth flashing like a predator who thought the hunt was over. "Well, well," he said, adjusting his tie. "You ready to make this official, old man?" I didn't answer. I just brushed past him and pushed open the doors, letting the echo of wood and marble announce my presence. Inside, the clerk's office hummed with the usual shuffle of papers and tapping of typewriters. Harris sat behind the desk, his expression carefully neutral, though his eyes flicked knowingly between me and Richard. Richard slapped a folder on the counter. "Here it is. Everything we discussed. Farm ownership transfer. Clear and clean. Just need his signature." He jabbed a finger in my direction, as if I were already defeated. I remained still, watching him with a calm I didn't entirely feel. Years of farming had taught me patience. You don't rush storms. You let them break on their own. Harris cleared his throat, flipping through Richard's folder. Then he reached into his drawer, pulled out another file, and laid it on the counter. My file. "This," Harris said slowly, "is the original deed. Signed by your father, Mr. Whitmore. Full ownership given to Edward. No co-owner listed." Richard's smile wavered. That can't be right. He told me. Dad told me." Harris didn't blink. "And this," he added, sliding the forged deed forward, "is the one you submitted. Notice the handwriting. Notice the inconsistencies. Forgery doesn't hold up here, Mr. Richard Whitmore." The room seemed to still. Richard's face flushed red, then pale. He stammered, It's not forgery. It's just—" And then Harris leaned back, looked him dead in the eye, and asked the line that turned the world on its head. "So, are you ready to sign it back to your brother?" The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Richard's mouth opened, then closed. His hands, which had always been quick with gestures and charm, now fidgeted on the desk like restless animals. He looked at me, expecting anger, expecting shouting, but I gave him nothing. Just steady eyes, steady breath, steady resolve. "You see," Harris continued, tapping the papers, "legally, you never had a claim. This farm was, is, and will remain Edward's. If you push further, we'll have to consider charges." The word charges landed like a hammer. Richard froze. His grin was gone, his charm stripped away. For the first time in years, he looked small. I turned, ready to leave, but not before saying one thing, quiet and firm. "You thought you could erase me with ink. But legacy isn't forged, Richard. It's earned." As I stepped out into the heavy summer air, I didn't feel relief yet. What I felt was clarity. The storm had broken, but the cleanup was just beginning. Winning at the courthouse wasn't the end. Not for me, not for the farm. Richard had been exposed, yes. His forged papers shredded, his arrogance punctured. But men like him, men who feed off entitlement, they don't stop just because they've been humiliated once. No, they wait for cracks, for moments of weakness. And I wasn't about to give him another chance. That evening, I drove straight to Caldwell's office, the lawyer my father had trusted decades ago. Caldwell greeted me with a firm handshake, eyes sharp despite his age. "You did well today," he said, after I told him what had happened. "But if you want this to end for good, we'll need to lock it down tighter than a steel gate." He spread the documents across his oak desk, the lamplight catching the ink of my father's signature. "We'll reaffirm the deed in court records, make it impossible for him to contest, and then we'll set up a trust." "A trust?" I asked. "Yes," Caldwell said, his voice steady. You place the farm in a legal trust tied to your will. That way, even if your brother tries again, he'll find nothing to grab onto. The farm won't belong to him. It won't even belong to you, technically. It will belong to your chosen heirs, your grandchildren, your daughter, the bloodline that respects it. I felt my chest tighten. My grandchildren. The thought of them running across these fields long after I was gone filled me with something Richard could never understand: peace. We signed the papers over the next hour. My name, firm and unshaking, joined my father's on the deed. And with each stroke of the pen, I felt the weight of betrayal lift and transform into something sharper: justice. When I returned home, Mary was waiting on the porch. I handed her the folder, thicker now with new protections, and she leafed through it quietly. Her eyes softened as she read. "So it's done?" she asked. "It's done," I said. "The farm is secure, forever. Richard can circle all he wants, but he'll never land again." She smiled faintly. "Your father would be proud." I nodded, my throat tight. Maybe. Or maybe he'd just say, "About time you fought back." We both laughed softly, the sound carrying into the twilight. Of course, Richard didn't take it quietly. He came storming to the house a week later, shouting from the driveway, his fists shaking. "You think you've won? You think this is over?" I stepped out onto the porch, calm as stone. "It is over. The papers are signed. The farm is in trust. You're out. For good." His face twisted, rage bubbling. "You betrayed me, Eddie." I shook my head. "No, Richard, you betrayed yourself." For a moment he stood there, chest heaving, eyes darting. Then, realizing he had no weapon left, no leverage, he turned and drove off, tires spitting gravel like curses. I watched him go, not with anger, but with pity. Because a man who values ownership over honor, greed over love, is already bankrupt, no matter how much land he holds. That night, I walked the fields under the stars. The earth was cool beneath my boots, the air humming with crickets. I stopped beneath the old oak tree, the one my father planted, and placed my hand on its bark. "This is for you," I whispered, "for every Whitmore who came before me, and for every one yet to come." And for the first time in months, maybe years, I felt at peace. The farm was mine. More importantly, it was safe. And Richard, he had nothing but dust. If you've ever dealt with someone like Richard, you know humiliation doesn't make them humble. It makes them dangerous. After the courthouse, after the trust was filed, after every legal door was locked, he still wasn't ready to accept it. For weeks he prowled around like a caged animal. Word spread fast in town about what had happened. Some folks shook my hand at the feed store saying, "Good on you, Eddie." About time someone stood up to him. Others just looked away, not wanting to pick sides. Small towns have long memories, and scandals like this stick to a family name like burrs on wool. Richard didn't take the whispers kindly. He stormed into the diner one morning, red-faced, slamming his fist on the counter. "He stole it from me," he shouted to anyone who'd listen. "That farm was mine. He cheated me." But the people didn't nod along this time. They stared into their coffee cups, uncomfortable. Because deep down, they knew the truth. They'd seen who worked that land day after day, who carried the weight when times got hard. It wasn't Richard. It never had been. At home, though, the fallout cut deeper. He started calling the house at all hours. Sometimes threats, sometimes pitiful pleas. "Eddie, you can't do this to me. We're brothers." Blood? The first time, I almost answered. The second, I let it ring. By the third, I pulled the phone from the wall. Mary supported me, but I could see the toll it took on her. She hated the rift. Hated the way family gatherings felt like battlefields now, cousins and nieces caught in the crossfire of loyalty. One Sunday, Claire brought her kids over, and while they played in the yard, she sat me down. "Dad," she said gently, "you did the right thing. But you need to prepare yourself. Uncle Richard isn't going to forgive you for this." I sighed. I didn't ask for forgiveness. I asked for respect, and he couldn't give it. She squeezed my hand. "Then let him go." Her words lingered long after she left. Let him go, as if it were that simple, as if cutting ties with the boy I'd once carried on my shoulders, the teenager I'd bailed out of trouble, the man I'd saved from ruin, could be as clean as cutting a rope. But sometimes ropes rot from the inside, and when they finally snap, you realize they were never strong enough to hold you anyway. The breaking point came 2 weeks later. Richard pulled into the drive, tires screeching, dust rising like smoke. He staggered out, face twisted with rage. "You ruined me," he shouted, veins bulging at his neck. "Do you understand that? I had plans. You had lies," I interrupted, stepping onto the porch. He froze, eyes blazing. "You think you're better than me? You think Dad wanted you to have everything and me to have nothing?" I shook my head slowly. "No, Richard. Dad wanted us both to honor it. But you didn't want honor. You wanted ownership." For a moment silence stretched between us, heavy and final. Then he spat on the ground, climbed back into his truck, and tore away, gravel flying. I knew then that whatever bond remained between us had snapped for good. That night, I walked through the farmhouse alone, the air heavy with echoes. I paused by the mantel again, looking at the family photo. For the first time, I felt no sting, no bitterness, just sadness. I reached out, turned the photo face down. Some ties don't deserve to stay on display. The storm had passed, but it left scars in its wake. And yet, beneath it all, the farm stood steady. The land didn't betray me. The soil didn't turn against me. Only Richard had. And that was a truth I could live with. In the weeks that followed, life on the farm returned to rhythm. The rooster still crowed before dawn. The cattle still lowed for feed. The field still drank the morning dew as though nothing had changed. But for me, everything had. I'd fought storms before. Storms of weather, storms of debt, storms of doubt. But this storm had been different. This one came wearing my brother's face. And though it passed, the wreckage it left behind wasn't physical. It was carved into memory. Some nights I'd sit on the porch and think about all the sacrifices I'd made, the vocations Mary and I never took, the sleep lost, the aches in my bones. For years I told myself I made those sacrifices for family, for Richard too. But what I learned is this: sacrifice means nothing to the selfish. To them, your sweat is just free water for their thirst. I've come to realize family isn't defined by blood alone. Blood is just biology. Family is loyalty, respect, and honor. My daughter Claire, my grandchildren running through the fields with laughter in their voices, they are my family. They see the value of what I've built, not because of what they can take, but because of what they can carry forward. And that's why the trust I signed wasn't just about protecting land. It was about protecting meaning, ensuring that when I'm gone, the soil won't be parceled out to the highest bidder, but kept alive by the ones who understand its worth. I still think about Richard sometimes, about the boy we once were, 2 brothers sitting under the oak tree, dreaming about the future. I wonder how that boy grew into the man who tried to steal everything. But I don't let it consume me. Pity is all I have left for him. Because the truth is, he lost more than land that day at the courthouse. He lost me. He lost his place in this legacy. And he has no one to blame but himself. The farm, though, it thrives. Some evenings I walk the fields as the sun sets, the sky awash in gold. I stop beneath the oak tree, press my hand to its bark and feel the steady heartbeat of roots that run deeper than betrayal. This is safe now, I whisper, not just to myself, but to the generations before me and the ones yet to come. This is protected. And as the wind rustles through the corn, I feel an answer, not in words, but in peace. So here's what I'll leave you with. If you've been betrayed by family, know this. Betrayal doesn't define you. It defines them. What defines you is how you rise after it. Whether you let it break you, or whether you turn it into strength. I chose strength. I chose justice. And in doing so, I found peace. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel, share this video, and let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Maybe you've faced betrayal in your own family. Maybe you've had to fight for what's right. Tell your story. Because at the end of the day, land can be stolen, money can be forged, but dignity is ours to protect. And mine, like this farm, will stand.